All right, everybody, welcome back to the Homeless Chronicles, where we dig deep into the history of homelessness, poverty, and what societies back in the day used to do to solve this or control their most vulnerable people. I'm your host, Grant Denton, and I'm with
Harmony Heywood. We're going to be talking about homelessness in ancient Mesopotamia.
Ancient Mesopotamia. Now we're here to take you on a journey back to 1750 BC to one of the world's oldest civilizations, ancient Mesopotamia, where clay tablets, temple laws, and the earliest cities revealed a surprising story about how they dealt with their homeless. All right, what if I told you that the world's first laws included rules about debt relief, protections for the orphans, and even early public housing in the form of temple lands? Long before we had welfare systems, the people of Ur and Babylon were figuring out how to help or at least manage the poor. Hey, let's set the scene. It's 1750 BCE. The first megacities are beginning to rise.
Yes.
Cities like Ur are crowded, and people are living under the rule of King Hammurabi. His code is one of the first legal systems in history ever.
Yes, it's like our first law, like the first law book, the first time it was written down.
So can you tell us how back then people viewed poverty?
Yes, I can. So this is the first time in history that anyone had to deal with poverty, or homelessness rather. So they were kind of writing the book, literally, on how to do this. They were just kind of, figuring this out as they went along.
And well, why? Like, why is it the first time that that homelessness is coming up?
Well, so we've got like the cities of Ur and Babylon. These are the first cities.
Mm-hmm.
So before this, everyone lived a kind of like a nomadic lifestyle. And so everyone was just kind of, moved in tribes, and they would just sort of camp, go around with the seasons. They would kind of migrate for food. So, but this is the first time we start seeing the mega city. Like a New York, Ur is the biggest city in the world at this point. And so you've got a lot of people in houses all of a sudden.
Okay, so now all these problems are coming up. What systems were developed to manage these problems?
Well, they developed the earliest welfare systems. They had relief, although relief was tied to the temples, because this is where we start to see this recurring theme that we're going to see here in ancient antiquity, where a lot of care, this was sent to the religious sector.
Yeah.
This is before separation of church and state too.
Yeah.
So religion was life. That this is what ruled these early civilizations. So they actually had provided a welfare system. It was tied to the temples, and they provided for widows, orphans, not necessarily just the general public homeless. It was more just vulnerable, really vulnerable, people.
When does the Code of Hammurabi come into play? Well, first of all, what is it? When does it come into play, and what is it?
So it's just a couple days ago, 1750 BC, and
I was believing you. I'm like
6,000 years ago. So it's the original law book. And it was written by King Hammurabi, which is why it's called the Code of Hammurabi. He wrote these laws down in 1750. It provided laws for basically to prevent poverty and vulnerable people, and not as much as to help people that were already homeless. This is they're preventative. Like, we don't want people to get to that situation, so we're going to make these laws to kind of mitigate that a little bit. So they had like debt forgiveness, legal protection for widows and orphans. You can't be cheated out of inheritance property. Surpluses, there was food that was stored, in the cities for people who don't have food. Limited on how long you could have debt and carry debt and things like that. So it was made to keep people from getting so far down they can't, crawl themselves back
so that they
up.
wouldn't have to be slaves forever.
Yes, exactly. Because no one wants to be a slave forever.
Just if you're going to be a slave, just be one for a short period of time. And I'm sure that they've seen this happen where they're like, we want to avoid this. Most rules are put in place to prevent things that we've already experienced. So let's read. I want to read some of these laws because they're super interesting. Let's talk about law 30 through 31.
Yes.
And it's about tenants and rent. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So tenants and rent. So when you have a situation where the crops, they don't do well, they spoil, someone doesn't have a way to make a living, as a landlord, you can't charge them rent. Like a natural disaster of no fault of their own, you have to let them out of it.
That sounds similar to some COVID shit.
It doesn't it a little bit? Yes, it is very similar to COVID. Yeah, natural disaster. It's not people's fault. We have to, not charge them rent. Although this was forever though, where COVID then bounced back and then people had to pay rent. this is if it's a storm or an act of God, it's God's will. You don't have to pay rent.
It's just what it is. So that was just an accepted thing. You're going to have crises.
It can put a landlord maybe in a situation. However, back then, if you own land, I don't think you're going to get much. You've got so much money. You're the elite. It's not going to put you. It's not like today where you've got this like working poor who can own things. It was a totally different situation.
So in that kind of like that covers also when you get into that question also covered Law 36, where a person in debt couldn't be forced to provide interest payments if a natural disaster ruined the crop.
Yeah. So this is all about, because remember we said church and religion, church and state, right? So these are considered acts by God. God made your crops fail. Who are you? You can't stand in that way.
Yeah, so you're not in debt to anybody.
You're not in debt. I think you should read the next law.
Now, Law 117, like, so you have to, like, you gotta know, when you're reading these are laws that are, like, that are applicable to the social norms. And what is a social norm?
This is a really important law, and I want Grant to read this one.
Now, Law 117, if a man is in debt and cannot pay, he may sell his wife, son, or daughter into service for up to 3 years. On the 4th year, they shall be set free.
Yes, and so this is what we're talking about, where it's preventative laws.
Yeah.
Because if you're a slave forever, you're not going to crawl out of that.
Yeah.
But so they're allowing you out of servitude, and they're allowing your husband completely out of his debt as well, which is very kind.
Well, if you look at it too, like if you don't have any back then, right? Your money or what you owed, whatever they exchanged, was carried value, and if you don't have that, well, what carries value?
And also, the man has to work. He has to have a job. Women don't do crops. Women don't do that. Women, if they're not birthing children, they can clean a house. And so that's why you'd sell your wife, not your son. I think you'd sell a daughter too if you needed to. But the men weren't becoming slaves. It was the women that were becoming servitude slaves. This also applies to women can sell themselves too. Not in that way. Sorry, Nevada. Because their husband died.
Yeah.
And there's no one to take care of them. So they can offer up their services as like, I'll be your live-in maid.
And so I have a question too. Does debt, and I know there's limits for like the debt here, but does debt back then, does it pass time? So if I'm the dad and I am in debt to somebody and I die, do my kids have to pick that up? Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question, but it does provide an answer. I do know. Occasionally, the king would forgive all debt.
Yeah.
But that was at his discretion. I'm in a good mood. I'm going to forgive everyone's debt.
Okay.
If I'm not in a good mood, I'm going to not. He could choose people. Your debt, not yours.
You're still in debt.
Not you.
You suck, so you're still gonna. Okay. So it was like pretty much there were laws written around how the king feels about shit.
Yeah. King and God. Those are the only two people that have final say in everything.
Okay, so overarching, right? It looks like they identified issues in their society. They identified issues that were related to being in poverty or being poor and not having things or in debt. And these were the solutions to them. And overarching, was it a successful solution?
Yes and no. Relief was real. It really was. But it was selective. It was tied to religious or royal authority. Yeah. So the relief isn't for everybody, unfortunately. But the relief that was there. You could get out of debt. You didn't have to pay rent if you didn't have the money. There's things that today's day and age would make you homeless, that would situational homeless, that would push you over that edge that they did mitigate. So that was good, but it was only temporarily effective. That's the problem. Because it's through temple support, it's not a lasting structural solution, which is what is needed for long term. So it wasn't a permanent safety net. Yeah, and it was crisis related.
It looks like that, like in here, when you look to helping folks, there were people that they would help, and it looks like maybe there might have been some folks that they wouldn't help. So
times were different. So we're talking only members of their society. Yeah. Natural born members of their society. They're not helping the larger populace of the world. So if you've got a situation where they conquered a town or a city-state, and then they take all of those people as slaves, this does not apply to those people. Are slaves forever. Okay. That's just their lot in life. This is only for their own people, which today it sounds a little racist, but back in the day, this is just how this is how things were taken care of. This is
So
how everything was.
so the assistance only applies to their own people.
Yeah, to people that speak, their culture, their language.
We see how they operate. How can we relate how they worked with their homeless population to today?
Yes, definitely. So today, unfortunately today, we're still relying on temporary fixes rather than systematic change. This was also what they were doing then as well. So, there's root causes are the same. You've got debt, displacement, disaster, and just like today, it's dependent more on goodwill rather
The four
than
Ds.
The four
Debt,
Ds.
displacement, disaster, and dependency.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And then, because of that, no. So just like today, though, it's goodwill.
Yeah.
It's relied on people like what you do. It's goodwill, and up to the kings. It's not systematic law change.
Yeah.
That's across board for everybody. So that's kind of where we're kind of failing in the same places that they failed in.
Yeah.
But we're doing similar things to what they did as well. So the very first way that they decided, the people that wrote the book, we're still sort of following that model.
Yeah.
All these years later, all these 5,000 years later.
So interesting, and it seems like we're not really learning from our mistakes. Well, so and
Yes.
we're gonna look into that, right? We're gonna go into our next episode, which
Yes.
is ancient Egypt.
Yes, I'm excited
The
about
grains,
this
the gods, and the giving. The 3 G's. Poverty relief in ancient Egypt, and we can see how the difference between Mesopotamian times and how that laid the groundwork for future societies and how they dealt with their poor.
Exactly, yeah. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Next episode, the Homeless Chronicles.